Good morning, everyone. The half hour we have, we're going to talk about international markets. And I'm delighted first to introduce you to our Skype participant who deserves a Medal of Honor for participating, it's probably 10 o'clock at night for you, Matt. Is that all right? Is that about right?
It's actually 1:45.
1:45. God, I was wrong by 3 hours. I forgot where I was. Well, let me introduce the others first, and then we'll get to you, Matt. Immediately to my left is John Jacobson from the British Columbia Innovation Council. To his left is Fritz Velnick from SAS Energy and on the SI Software Division board. And to his left is Ruben Hernandez from the San Jose Chamber of Commerce. We started off this morning talking about the opportunity in international markets, and we heard that some companies are already generating more than 50% of their revenues outside of the United States. So not having an international strategy is probably a huge mistake at this point. But let me introduce Matt Roberts. Matt Roberts runs something which all of you should be aware of, and I'll do a longer introduction in Matt's case. Matt runs something called UCITO, the United States Information Technology Office. UCITO was formed in 1995, and SII is a founding partner of UCITO. There are 5 trade associations that are what we call parent organizations or supporting organizations of UCITO, and major IT companies are all members of UCITO. People, as diverse as Microsoft and Cisco and Qualcomm and Intel, et cetera. Any major company that has IT interests or business interests in China is a member of UCITO, and they work on a number of policy objectives. Welcome, Matt. At 1 o'clock in the morning, and the managing director of UCITO is Matt Roberts, who in a prior life was president of Dow Jones China. So he's seen both from the content side and on the IT side some of the machinations of the Chinese in terms of how it deals with foreign companies trying to do business in China. Welcome, Matt. Why don't we start with you and talk for a few minutes about doing business in China, especially in the cloud and cloud services. Could you hear
Sounds good. Yes. Thanks a lot, Ken, for that very generous introduction. It's a real pleasure to be part of this event, and I'm glad to be sharing a few insights into the opportunity in the China market. Wish I could be there in person so I could meet everybody else on the panel, but hopefully I'll have an opportunity for that later on. As you mentioned, UCITO focuses largely in engaging with Chinese policymakers on the regulatory environment. So we've had quite a lot of discussions of some of the challenges for foreign technology providers in this market, particularly in providing cloud services. And there is, without a doubt, no shortage of regulatory challenges in such a fast-moving sector, particularly with Chinese government concerns over national security, over pushes for implementation of indigenous technology, and a number of potential market access barriers for foreign technology providers in this market, particularly in cloud computing services. That said, the Chinese government has clearly identified cloud computing as one of the key drivers in its 12th five-year plan, in the rollout of its strategic emerging industries, and has put quite a lot of policy support in place to develop cloud services. Just last month, we had a couple of roundtables with some of the information security and regulatory authorities in China on cloud. And one of them was the China Cloud Computing Promotion and Policy Forum, which is under the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology and is tasked with developing cloud in China. One of the things that they had just recently done was a survey of the cloud opportunity. And they noticed, in their publication, they noted that the China public cloud service market is currently quite small. It's only about 560 million US dollars. That's about 3.5 billion RMB. compared to, say, a global public cloud service market, which is probably 20-some billion US dollars for 2012. The growth rates are amazing, but that's not surprising. The investment at this point is largely focused on the hardware side of things. So whereas in the global IT landscape, services in the cloud are accounting for more than 50% of the market share, in China, the investments in hardware are currently between 50 and 60% across many sectors, whereas the services part of cloud computing is still a meager 10 to 20%. There's a good potential opportunity here in terms of small and mid-sized enterprises being interested in adopting cloud computing. And over 50% of the small and mid-sized enterprises that were quoted in the survey had started to use cloud computing, at least with cloud servers or cloud storage or maybe enterprise communication services. Their main concerns in selecting cloud services were the stability of the service and the security of the service, not so much concerned with the brand or success stories or word of mouth, but just mostly focusing on stability and security. And I think that speaks a little bit to the general lack of trust in this market, which could be translated into a huge opportunity for firms that are able to navigate some of the market access barriers. So I'll stop there. I look forward to hearing what some of the other panelists have to say, and I'd be happy to go a little bit deeper and answer some questions.
Thank you, Matt. We will come back to you and we'll try to take some questions from the audience. Let me turn now to John Jacobson from British Columbia's Innovation Council. John used to be in the private sector, and now he's joined the government of British Columbia. Quite a transformation.
Quite a transformation.
Talk to us a little bit about cloud and cloud services in Canada.
Okay, well, speaking from my background in the real world, the commercial world, rather than the government side, I would say that Canada is for an American company, for a U.S. company that wants to do business outside the U.S., Canada is a great place to start. And it's a great place to start for a couple of reasons. One is the market in Canada. We're 34 million people. It's about 10% smaller than California, so it's a sizable market. It speaks English. It has elements of other cultures embedded in it. You go to Quebec, you're going to have people that think and speak in French. You come to Vancouver, you've got Cantonese and Mandarin and Hindi. We have one of the largest South Asian communities outside of India. So you have an interesting market to go and play in without really having to go very far from home. And you have a buyer community that's very similar to the people you deal with day in and day out inside the U.S. We think the same, we speak the same language, we watch the same TV shows. I think Jon Stewart's great, It's very much like what you do now, with a couple of subtle differences that, if you're planning on going global, will really be very helpful. And one of the biggest differences is going to be privacy laws. Canada has them. And one of the big obstacles, for instance, in my new government role in doing business with cloud companies, is that we're not allowed to store any citizen data in a database that's resident outside of Canada. But the real target there is the US, and the real target in the US is the Patriot Act. So you're going to have not just this problem in Canada, but this problem around the world with the Patriot Act. It really does get in the way of putting cloud services out there.
Hey, let's go back to Matt for one quick second. Can you store data Can you store Chinese data outside of China?
Well, it's interesting. China has just developed a government procurement guideline, a standard for cloud computing services. And in fact, one of the requirements in that government procurement guideline is that all of the servers are within Chinese borders. So it's looking like we're going in that same direction.
Yeah, so half the advantage of cloud services is lost if 230 countries in the world all require that the data about their citizens is maintained within their own borders. I mean, what's the advantage of that? Even Liechtenstein will probably have a rule like that. Thanks. Fritz, why don't you, Fritz Velnick, from SAS Energy. You want to talk a little about what's going on in Europe?
Yeah, I like what I hear so far. And the first thing I want to pop up.
I think if you speak up a little bit, this mic
Okay.
may be a little far. Go ahead.
Is the mic okay, like this?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I heard here as well, and what resembles, I'm from Europe, is the first question which pops up from customers over in Europe is, where's my data running? And you know, that's really a main issue. You already referred to that as in Canada. It's the same over in Europe. So if you want to move to Europe, you know, you better be sure that the data of the customers is running in the EU environment. Otherwise, you have a very hard sale on moving forward. Once you've done that, I personally believe that the European market is pretty interesting because we have 300 million people. We're in some kind of an economic crisis, so spendings are low on governments,
It's
banking.
a perpetual recession.
It's a perpetual recession, yeah. Well, we don't know how it happens, but it's still the case, yeah. And it's driven by debt. We believe that we have built up in the last centuries too much debt per capita we are having in Europe. I think it's still half of the debt we have as the average US citizen, but still, this is what's happening. And so what we see in the landscape is that a lot of companies are just looking for innovating their business models and have that supported, you know, with new business models and new methods of payments. And so they're looking for all kinds of new innovative solutions as well. The market in acceptance in Europe is lying behind to the US acceptance in North America. And I think there will be a lag of somewhere between 1 to 2 years. And for US-based companies, you know, who are offering these kind of great services, what we see here as well, I personally believe that's a great opportunity to move over there and build that landscape and build their revenue channels in a huge market, which is really interesting to be at. So what's important in Europe is A, data. Have your data running within the EU, that's a prerequisite. And secondly is that you're able on building trust and transparency. It was even mentioned before in the keynote. Europe is a specific countries with specific cultures, specific languages. And you better apply and comply with all kinds of rules and regulations which are there. Is it difficult? Yes, because we do not even understand often how the regulations are, if they are coming from Brussels or if they're coming from the local governments or whatever. But you better see to it that you're able on being transparent and showing to the customers that you comply or at least are working on being compliant with all this kind of stuff. And if we're able on doing that, I think it's a pretty good landscape of doing business and providing SaaS solutions.
Great, then let's go to our last panelist. Ruben Hernandez is with the San Jose Chamber of Commerce. Ruben, I understand you're focused on Latin America.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to have a little combination here because just put it in perspective, there's Latin America is 500 million people. It's about $4 trillion in GDP. And you have, add to that, the 60 million people that are here that are Hispanic descent and $1 trillion spending power. So you add all that up and you have a pretty attractive market. Now, what's the disadvantage of that is a very diverse market. But what I like what John said about Canada is that it's a very safe testing ground, Canada. And with the Hispanic market, you have a very safe testing ground because you don't have to learn new laws. You don't have to learn new cultures. If you deal with the Hispanic market in the US, it's a testing ground for Latin America. And if you follow the money, you follow the juggernauts in Latin America, Mexico, Brazil, and Venezuela. And nobody really talks about Venezuela because of Mr. Chavez, but is one of the largest trading partners of the US. If you look at the trading numbers between the US and Latin America, it's almost $400 billion, twice as much as China. China just took over the Netherlands as the second trading partner of Latin America. The US is way, way past that. And it's going to continue to do that because the US is also providing about $25 billion in aid to a lot of countries in Latin America. So depending on what industry you're in, if you are in education, if you are in military, if you're in health, governments are your major customers in those countries. And who do you go to? It's really the market here in the US to test it out. You work with agencies like USAID, US Trade Development Agency, and the US Department of Commerce, and you pretty much got free market research without having to go to those countries. So it's really, if you're really serious about the Latin American market, you start in the US. And as far as cloud computing, Latin America in certain spots, they're 10, 15 years behind the US. Other countries like Mexico and Brazil are way more advanced, but even within those countries, you got to look at the states because they're federations. So just like in the US, you're going to have to look at a strategy for each of the states in those countries.
Yeah. Well, let me, I know that you're more of a trade generalist than specifically focused on the software or cloud computing industry. So, I'm not trying to give you a gotcha question, but the question, with all the countries in Latin America, are they going down the road of requiring the data be stored locally?
Absolutely. Yeah, and this is, that's the other part I was going to talk about, transparency and data security is a major issue. In Latin America and different countries, they have issues of openness and political upheavals and things like that. Data is really, really important.
So in other words, if we were going to do business in, Colombia is a big market, 40 million people. If you're going to do business in Colombia, you would have to store data about, Colombian businesses, Colombian individuals in Colombia?
Absolutely, and you're going to have to deal with the military.
Wonderful.
That's a prerequisite.
Well, not, but when you're there, you're going to pretty much have to deal, just like in the U.S., you deal with the CIA sometimes, or the FBI. It's the same thing.
I want to go back to Fritz for a second. With 27 EU countries, I forget, was it 27, 28? There is a more cohesion. You're not required. It's a single EU market, so you're not required in terms of data storage, requiring that the national boundaries are adhered to. In other words, you could have a single storage facility in Belgium that would serve all of the EU market. Would that not be true?
Yeah, generally speaking, that's true, but practical, that's not true, because what we see as well that in certain countries, for instance, in Germany or Switzerland, they have other additional regulations on data security and on end user rights, on obtaining the data anytime they want. And these regulations are still different. And the question always is for all these kind of providers, can I comply with it? And that's very hard, so a lot of them are not compliant because we don't even know all the rules for ourselves, because it's a very difficult landscape. So what we see there is that what everybody tries to do is that they're working on to understand what the rules are and do the best effort, on being compliant with that. If you do that, that's something which is fair enough and good enough, to do business over in Europe.
Great, thanks. John, you want to jump in? You look like...
No, it's interesting to hear this, because of course I lived this in the business I've been involved with before, and it is sort of the norm in the international market that you're going to have local issues that look just like trade barriers and work just like trade barriers, that are really not aimed at trying to keep the business at home as much as they're trying to create an environment that is satisfactory to the citizens in the country. So some countries will then have privacy laws that are quite different than other countries, because that's what works in that political environment and with that group of citizens.
Well, when the issue of trade barriers comes up, it's got your name on it, Matt, with the Chinese efforts at a cloud computing initiative. You started on this a little bit, and I think we didn't give you quite enough time. Can you talk for a few minutes about the burgeoning or expected trade barriers that would come in the cloud computing environment in China, and what kind of pushback you and UCITO are giving the American companies to those barriers?
That's a great question, Ken.
We only
we could probably talk about that for another hour or so. But essentially, China has in terms of allowing investment in China's market, there are three categories. There are sectors that are encouraged for foreign investment, there are sectors that are restricted, and there are sectors that are prohibited. And telecoms has been one of those areas that has been prohibited and restricted. There are some services, basic telecom services are completely off limits to foreign investment. Some of the value-added services are permitted with the joint venture. But there are clear restrictions to allowing foreign companies to come into the telecom sector. On the internet side of things, there has been some permission for foreign investment in the internet sector. In fact, all of the major internet companies here do have foreign investment. Many of them are listed on NASDAQ. But they all nominally have a 100% domestic owned licensed service in the market. And the only way for a foreign investor to get into the internet side of things is to have a nominal domestic entity. I won't get into all the details of how that's done, but essentially what it means is the only players that are here are those who have curried favor with the Chinese government. There's not a lot of transparency in that approval process. Many companies have been able to get in the door, but they're all in the door basically by the graces of the Chinese government. That makes it very difficult for companies trying to launch new services in this market to determine just how they would bring cloud services in. Do you come in with a telecoms value-added services license? Do you come in as an internet model? Do you keep your servers offshore and then risk getting blocked by the so-called Great Firewall, which is becoming increasingly effective? Those of us living in Beijing, we don't access Facebook, we don't access Twitter, we don't access YouTube, and any website that has those components embedded in the web page either doesn't download or takes forever to download. So those are all very real issues for companies that have global cloud service models that might not be able to deliver those models to China. Currently, the Chinese government is also looking at expanding its telecom value-added services catalog. There's a regulation that has kept us busy the last 2 weeks, just came out in draft form, that would look at expanding the catalog of telecoms value-added services and could potentially catch some of the new cloud computing services that currently aren't clearly in the regulations. But I think from a very broad level, looking at the restrictions, China has both ideological concerns in terms of keeping control of what types of information and communication services are made available in its internet, and also national security concerns in terms of keeping the critical information infrastructure protected, and finally indigenous innovation concerns, trying to create a marketplace where Chinese companies have an opportunity to grow before the foreign competition comes in. All of those equate to some fairly significant market access barriers for cloud computing.
Hey, is there a local version of, a competitor to Facebook in China, since Chinese are blocked from having Facebook accounts? Is there a local?
Yes. In fact, for all of the major foreign internet companies, there are local varieties. Facebook has one. The big portals. There's an eBay equivalent with the biggest internet company in the world, Alibaba. So what's happened with that lack of transparency and market access, it's created a nice playing ground for the Chinese internet companies to grow very big.
Great, thanks. We only have 6 minutes and 33 seconds left to go. There's a little clock under your face, Matt. Let me open it up to questions from the audience. You have a rare opportunity to talk to our actor on the ground in China and 3 other terrific panelists. Any questions from the audience there? There's lights in our face. Got one over there. The mic is going over.
How much is the Chinese government and companies in China looking for consulting expertise and services in terms of adopting SaaS technology, and what's the best way to get involved with those companies?
Could you hear the question?
Yes, I could. It's interesting in terms of SaaS, based on this survey that the China Cloud Computing Promotion and Policy Forum did in March. SaaS accounts for roughly 80% of the market size in the public cloud service market right now, but it's only about 16% of the total user base. Still very small platforms, good profits. Your question is, how open is the Chinese government to consulting in that space? I think that's a pretty large question. Currently, a lot of the cloud services that are being provided in the market require some kind of a local partnership, either licensing the service to a local partner or trying to set up some JV so you can come in under the telecom value-added services. It's not very clear exactly how you could come in.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Bill McNee was looking for a mic, or he's got one right there. Oh, no, he's just waving hello. He's just waving hello.
So one question is IP protection in China, as well as other countries. And what is the current climate at the moment in terms of actually being able to protect software IP?
You heard the question?
I
Protecting
did.
IP.
These are all very good questions. I don't mean to dominate the panel. IP is a huge problem, particularly in software. China has had some special campaigns and other things to try and combat software piracy, but the fact remains that you can still walk out on the street and get pirated versions of many softwares, and it's basically stifled the development of China's own software market. But it means that there's a huge challenge to launching some of the software as a service platforms here, because you can still get pirated software fairly easily. And I think IP is going to be a challenge for quite some time.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Well, we'll go with our three panelists here for final comments. Ruben, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think Latin America is a great place to do business in terms of the positioning as a company here in the U.S. And I myself have a software company, and the way that we do business is actually working with local software providers in the cloud. And we don't go it alone, just like you wouldn't go it alone in China, you wouldn't go it alone in any country in Latin America. But I would say that you start in the U.S. and start with your contacts here and use all the resources that the U.S. has before you actually go into a country if this is your first time going in.
Great. Thank you. Fritz?
Yeah, I think for the European market, similar things are there. What's important there as well, due to cultural aspect, that I think it's important to work with partners within the EU, find your partners who have a very close entrance to the market. And the other important issue is that try to build trust towards the end user community, be transparent in the service delivery, and show that you're compliant in a way that everybody got a feeling that you do your utmost best to meet all these kind of regulation stuff. And if you have these things in line, I think it's a very great market to operate in and to be successful.
John?
And I would reiterate that I think Canada's a great place to come and do business if you're looking at operating around the world. We're not perhaps as well plugged into the Latin American market as we are to others, but certainly Canada's a great place to do business. Our legal system is similar enough, but it's a little bit different. Our population is similar, but it's a little bit different. The way we buy and the way we think is very much the same. And certainly as a way to kind of get your training wheels on about going global, it's a great place to have tried it out. And it's actually a great place to have done it from. I mean, a lot of companies come to Canada. They come with their partners. If you're partnered with Microsoft or any of the other majors, they all have massive operations in Canada. And you can, if you've got a partnership in place, you can extend that into the other market without any trouble. And you come there, you learn a little bit about doing business outside the U.S., and then you can find people who know how to take you around the world.
Great. Thank you. Matt, you have the last word. And by the way, before you say that, that's a beautiful wood sculpture behind you. I think we're all admiring it. It was a nice backdrop from a blank wall. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I just want to say I wholeheartedly agree with what Fritz has said about the importance of building trust and transparency. And I think that is clearly the opportunity for foreign cloud computing service and technology providers in the China market. It's a market where tried and true technologies do have an advantage if you can navigate some of the complexities to getting into the market. And I look forward to working with companies that do make that step. Thanks again, Ken, for giving me this opportunity today. Real pleasure to be part of this.
Well, thank you. At 1 o'clock, 1:30 in the morning, it's time for you to get some sleep. Thank you, Matt. Thank you to our panelists, and we'll move on to the next session. Thanks, everyone.